Disciple Up, number 151. C.S. Lewis versus the coronavirus? This is Disciple Up, the Disciple Empowering Podcast where psychology, science, the real world, sin, self, and culture meet head on, and Scripture rules. If you're a follower of Christ looking to grow or looking for some biblical answers, then get ready, because it's time to Disciple Up. Hey everybody, welcome back to Disciple Up, the Disciple Empowering Podcast. And this week, like I did last week, I'm doing something I really hadn't planned on. But given everything that's happening, it's just amazing things that are happening, and not in a good way do I say amazing. Hold on, I gotta adjust my mic here. We're coming back to discuss this. I saw something on social media that actually turned out to be good. I know, it's amazing, but it does happen occasionally. And we're going to be discussing that in connection to the coronavirus. Now, for those of you that, if this is your first time listening, this is Disciple Up, the Disciple Empowering Podcast. My name's Louie Marsh. I'm a senior pastor at Christ Church on the River in Parker, Arizona. This is my podcast, and I'm glad that you're with us today. Tons more episodes where this one came from. You can check everything out at discipleup.org. That's where the show notes for this show will be, which you want to check out because there's a couple of links there that are important to you. First of all, what I'm going to be sharing with you today is an article that C.S. Lewis wrote. This is in a book which you can pick up at Amazon.com, of course, especially now that if you can't go outside, that's your only choice. I have the Kindle version of it. It's called Present Concerns, Journalistic Essays, C.S. Lewis. So this is a collection of essays that Lewis wrote a long, long time ago. How long ago, you ask? Well, I'm so glad that you asked that, because I'm going to tell you. Believe it or not, he wrote this article, which is titled On Living in an Atomic Age, for a magazine called Informed Reader. It was on pages 78 through 84, and it was published in, drum roll please, hold on, 1948. Yes, you heard me right. 1948, before I was born. That's actually 4 years or so before I was born. Probably a lot more for most of you. So, you may be asking yourself, well, what on earth could this possibly have to do with the coronavirus? Well, like I said, I saw a post about this on Facebook. I checked it out. I bought the book, read the article, and I realized they were right. Now, today, of course, everyone is concerned with, not everyone, but most everyone, with the coronavirus, getting it, spreading it, dying from it, being sick, whatever. Well, back in 1948, there was no coronavirus, obviously. There was something else. It was called the atomic bomb. Now, people today are pretty used to dealing with and living with the idea of atomic bombs and missiles and, power plants, and we just sort of take it for granted. We know it's there. We know it's a danger. But ever since the Soviet Union collapsed, people are mistakenly under the impression that it's no problem anymore. I say mistaken because it is mistaken, but nevertheless, back in 1948, this is 3 years, less actually than 3 full years, after the dropping of the atomic bomb in Hiroshima and then Nagasaki. So this is still new to people, and they are freaked out about it. People stayed freaked out about it for a long time. I think when I look back growing up, people in the 60s and the late 50s and probably 60s and into the 70s probably viewed this a lot like today some people view global warming, and that whole thing's going to kill us all. And, I remember as a kid, you'd do the little things where you'd have the drills and crouch down under your desk so that if the bomb exploded far away, the window shattered, you wouldn't be cut up by the glass. That way, if you survived the fireball from the bomb, if it fell far enough away, then, of course, you would have the privilege of dying a fairly quick but still incredibly painful lingering death from radiation poisoning. Great. But we did that when I was a kid. A lot of schools did that. But today, of course, it is the coronavirus that is very upsetting people, just the whole idea of pandemics in general. So I'm going to read this article that C.S. Lewis wrote way back in 1948. And that's a long time. And see how it relates, because I think it does. You may or may not agree, but I hope you'll check it out. C.S. Lewis writes this. I'm going to be cutting in and out. I'll be making comments on things. And, of course, as always, I'll be slurping down some great Mio to keep my throat wet as I speak. There we go. Okay. Lewis writes, in one way, we think a great deal too much of the atomic bomb. How are we to live in an atomic age? I am tempted to reply, why, as you would have lived in the 16th century, when the plague visited London almost every year, or as you would have lived in a Viking age when raiders from Scandinavia might land and cut your throat any night. Remember, this is written in England, so this was part of their history, of course. Back to the article. Or, indeed, as you are already living in an age of cancer, an age of syphilis, an age of paralysis, an age of air raids, an age of railroad accidents, an age of motor accidents. We could go on to add things like an age of terror attacks, an age of dispute over climate change, whatever your position on that is, an age of, pandemic divorce in a sense, or, sexually transmitted diseases, or, more than a few years now, maybe a decade and a half, 2 decades ago, AIDS, on and on it goes. Back to the article. In other words, do not let us begin by exaggerating the novelty of our situation. Believe me, dear sir or madam, you and all whom you love were already sentenced to death before the atomic bomb was invented. And quite a high percentage of us were going to die in unpleasant ways. We had indeed one great, very great advantage over our ancestors, anesthetics. But we have that still. It is perfectly ridiculous to go about whimpering and drawing long faces because the scientists have added one more chance of painful and premature death to a world which already bristled with such chances and in which death itself was not a chance at all, but a certainty. Now, he mentions here a minute ago about the plague. And last week in episode 150, and there's a direct link to episode 150 in the show notes of this episode, 151, at discipleup.org, we talked about and read to you some writings from Martin Luther about this, who did live during the Black Death and who ministered in there and talked about the Christian response to that. So, yeah, what we're dealing with today is historically speaking, if you take the broad view of history, it's nothing unusual. It's unusual for us now because our technology has insulated us and isolated us from much that Mother Nature has to throw at us, but it's not unusual. Okay, so he goes on to say, let me just back up, just read a little bit of this. He says, it's ridiculous to be drawing long faces because the scientists have added one more chance of painful and premature death to a world which already bristled with such chances and in which death itself was not a chance at all, but a certainty. This is the first point to be made, and the first action to be taken is to pull ourselves together. Let me just stop here and say, if you've been to the store around here, there have been no reported cases of the virus in La Paz County, Arizona. And yet today in the town of Parker, which is the biggest town in La Paz County, the capital, you can't buy toilet paper in the store to save your life. Pull yourself together, indeed, people. Back to the article. If we are all going to be destroyed by an atomic bomb, let that bomb, when it comes, find us doing sensible and human things. Praying, working, teaching, reading, listening to music. And every time he says atomic bomb or the bomb, think coronavirus. If it's coming, and it is, and if most of us are probably going to get it, and we probably will, many of us, then when we get it, let it find us doing, quote, sensible and human things, praying, working, teaching, reading, listening to music, bathing the children, playing tennis, chatting to our friends over a pint and a game of darts. Yes, he said a pint there. C.S. Lewis drank and smoked. I always love it when my friends who are very fundamentalist about those kind of things quote C.S. Lewis because he wouldn't be allowed to be in their church. Now, I neither drink nor smoke, but Scripture says you can drink if you don't get drunk. Smoking, a whole nother story. But he did. He smoked cigars and pipes, I think. Not, he says, huddled together like frightened sheep and thinking about bombs or viruses. They may break our bodies, a microbe can do that, but they need not dominate our minds. That's right. And, of course, one way that you can make sure they're not dominating your minds is not to spend every waking hour watching the news. Yes, I know you need to watch to keep up with things because the story's changing fast. Just today, I had a meeting this morning with my associate pastor, Amy. We went through, made some decisions and did some things and put it out on Facebook. And between the time I put it up on Facebook and the time 6 o'clock rolled, or 4:30 rolled around, some things had changed because the government's changing their guidelines. So I understand that, but it shouldn't dominate your every waking thought. But you reply, it's not death, not even painful and premature death that we are bothering about. Of course, the chance of that is not new. What is new is that the atomic bomb may finally and totally destroy civilization itself. The lights may be put out forever. I've heard people say that about this virus. It could change the way we live. It could destroy civilization. Back to the article. That brings us much nearer to the real point. But let me try to make clear exactly what I think that point is. What were your views about the ultimate future of civilization before the atomic bomb or the coronavirus appeared on the scene? What did you think all this effort of humanity was to come to in the end? The real answer is known to almost everyone who has even a smattering of science, yet, oddly enough, it is hardly ever mentioned. And the real answer, almost beyond doubt, is that, with or without atomic bombs or coronaviruses, the whole story is going to end in nothing. The astronomers hold out no hope that this planet is going to be permanently inhabitable. The physicists hold out no hope that organic life is going to be a permanent possibility in any part of the material universe. Not only this Earth, but the whole show. All the suns of space are to run down. Nature is a sinking ship. Bergson talks about this elan vital, and Mr. Shaw talks about the, quote, life force, unquote, as almost sounds like Star Wars, doesn't it? Life force, as if they could surge on forever and ever, but that comes of concentrating on biology and ignoring the other sciences. There is really no such hope. Nature does not, in the long run, favor life. If nature is all that exists, in other words, if there is no God and no life of some quite different sort somewhere outside of nature, then all stories will end in the same way, in a universe from which all life is banished without possibility of return. It will have been an accidental flicker, and there will be no one even to remember it. No doubt atomic bombs and coronaviruses may cut its duration on this present planet shorter than it might have been, but the whole thing, even if it lasted for billions of years, must be so infinitesimally short in relation to the oceans of dead time which precede and follow that I cannot feel excited about its curtailment. What the wars and the weather, are we in for another one of these periodic ice ages? Notice in the 40s, 50s, and 60s when I went to school, everybody was talking about the ice age was going to come back. We were going to ices. The glaciers were coming, and it was going to be a new ice age. Today we're talking about it's global warming. Well, they were wrong once. They could be wrong again. He goes on to say, let me just back up and read that. What the wars and the weather and the atomic bomb or the coronavirus have really done is to remind us forcibly of the sort of world we are living in which, during the prosperous period before 1914, we were beginning to forget. And this reminder is, so far as it goes, a good thing. And we have been waked from a pretty dream, and now we can begin to talk about realities. Boy, this is so true. This is exactly what has happened to us today. We lived in a dream world where we thought if we just had enough technology, this could not happen. And in spite of scientists and other people telling us, we didn't believe them. We just need more science, more. Let's open our borders. Let's travel. Let's do all these things. Open everything up. And it's going to be great. We'll all be in this together. Well, we are all in it together now, aren't we? Because it's spread worldwide in a flash. And that's the reality of the planet that we live on. These things do happen. And even with technology, they happen. Back to the article. We see at once when we have been waked. I would have written woken, but who am I to suggest a grammatical change to C.S. Lewis? No, not really. Shouldn't have done that. We see at once that the important question is not whether an atomic bomb is going to obliterate civilization. The important question is whether nature, the thing studied by the sciences, is the only thing in existence. Because if you answer yes to the second question, then the first question only amounts to asking whether the inevitable frustration of all human activities may be hurried on by our own action, instead of coming at its natural time. By the way, people who don't believe in God and who do believe in evolution, how do you know this isn't the way that the human race isn't going to be changed and pushed along in evolution? Or maybe this is evolution's way of ending our species. How do you know that's not true? You don't. Tough world out there when you don't believe in a God, I'll tell you that much. Back to the article. That is, of course, a question that concerns us very much. Even on a ship, which will certainly sink sooner or later, the news that the boiler might blow up now would not be heard with indifference by anyone. But those who knew that the ship was sinking in any case would not, I think, be quite so desperately excited as those who had forgotten this fact and were vaguely imagining that it might arrive somewhere. It is then on the second question that we really need to make up our minds. And let us begin by supposing that nature is all that exists. Let us suppose that nothing ever has existed or ever will exist except this meaningless play of atoms in space and time. That by a series of hundredth chances it has, regrettably, produced things like ourselves, conscious beings who now know that their own consciousness is an accidental result of the whole meaningless process and is therefore itself meaningless, though to us, alas, it feels significant. In this situation, there are, I think, three things one might do. One, you might commit suicide. Nature, which has blindly, accidentally given me for my torment this consciousness which demands meaning and value in a universe which offers neither, has luckily also given me the means of getting rid of it. I return the unwelcome gift. I will be fooled no longer. 2, you might decide simply to have as good a time as possible. The universe is a universe of nonsense, but since you're here, grab what you can. Unfortunately, however, there is, on these terms, so very little left to grab. Only the coarsest sensual pleasures. You can't, except in the lowest animal sense, be in love with a girl if you know and keep on remembering that all the beauties, both of her person and of her character, are momentary and accidental patterns produced by a collision of atoms, and that your own response to them is only a sort of psychic phosphorescence arising from the behavior of your genes. You can't go on getting any very serious pleasure from music if you know and remember that its air of significance is a pure illusion, that you like it only because your nervous system is irrationally conditioned to like it. You may still, in the lowest sense, have a good time, but just so far as it becomes very good, just in so far as it ever threatens to push you on from cold sensuality into real warmth and enthusiasm and joy, so far you will be forced to feel the hopeless disharmony between your own emotions and the universe in which you really live. 3, you may defy the universe. You may say, let it be irrational. I am not. Let it be merciless. I will have mercy. By whatever curious chance has produced me, now that I am here, I will live according to human values. I know the universe will win in the end, but what is that to me? I will go down fighting. Amidst all this wastefulness, I will persevere. Amidst all this competition, I will make sacrifices. Be damned to the universe. I suppose that most of us, in fact, while we still remain materialists, adopt a more or less uneasy alternation between the second and the third attitude. And although the third is incomparably the better, it is, for instance, much more likely to preserve civilization, both really shipwreck on the same rock. That rock, the disharmony between our own hearts and nature, is obvious in the second. The third seems to avoid the rock by accepting the disharmony from the outset and defying it, but it will not really work. In it, you hold up our own human standards against the idiocy of the universe. That is, we talk as if our own standards were something outside the universe, which can be contrasted with it, as if we could judge the universe by some standard borrowed from another source. But if, as we are supposing, nature, the space-time matter system, is the only thing in existence, then, of course, there can be no other source for our standards. They must, like everything else, be unintended and meaningless outcome of blind forces. Far from being a light from beyond nature, whereby nature can be judged, they are only the way in which anthropoids of our species feel when the atoms under our own skulls get into certain states. Those states being produced by causes quite irrational, unhuman, and non-moral. Thus, the very ground on which we defy nature crumbles under our feet. The standard we are applying is tainted at the source. If our standards are derived from this meaningless universe, they must be as meaningless as it. For most modern people, I think, thoughts of this kind have to be gone through before the opposite view can get a fair hearing. All naturalism leads us to this in the end, to a quite final and hopeless discord between what our minds claim to be and what they really must be if naturalism is true. They claim to be in spirit, that is, to be reason, perceiving universal intellectual principles and universal moral laws and possessing free will, but if naturalism is true, they must in reality be merely arrangements of atoms and skulls, coming about by irrational causation. We never think a thought because it is true, only because blind nature forces us to think it. We never do an act because it is right, only because blind nature forces us to do it. It is when one has faced this preposterous conclusion that one is at last ready to listen to the voice that whispers, "But suppose we really are spirits. Suppose that we are not the offspring of nature." For, really, the naturalistic conclusion is unbelievable. For one thing, it is only through trusting our own minds that we have come to know nature itself. If nature, when fully known, seems to teach us, that is, if the sciences teach us, that our own minds are chance arrangement of atoms, then there must have been some mistake, for if that were so, then the sciences themselves would be chance arrangements of atoms, and we should have no reason for believing in them. There is only one way to avoid this deadlock. We must go back to a much earlier view. We must simply accept that we are spirits, free and rational beings, at present inhabiting an irrational universe, and must draw the conclusion that we are not derived from it. We are strangers here. This world is not my home. I'm just passing through. Back to the article. Remember, this is the attitude you need to have when dealing with things like the atomic bomb or the coronavirus. We are strangers here. We come from somewhere else. Nature is not the only thing that exists. There is another world, and that is where we are from, and that explains why we do not feel at home here. A fish feels at home in the water. If we belonged here, we should feel at home here. All that we say about nature, red in tooth and claw, about death and time and mutability, all our half-amused, half-bashful attitude to our own bodies is quite inexplicable on the theory that we are simply natural creatures. If this world is the only world, how did we come to find its laws either so dreadful or so comic? If there is no straight line elsewhere, how did we discover that nature's line is crooked? But what, then, is nature, and how do we come to be imprisoned in a system so alien to us? Oddly enough, the question becomes much less sinister the moment one realizes that nature is not all. Mistaken for our mother, she is terrifying and even abominable. But if she is only our sister, if she and we have a common creator, if she is our sparring partner, then the situation is quite tolerable. Perhaps we are not here as prisoners, but as colonists. Only consider what we have done already to the dog, the horse, or a daffodil. She is indeed a rough playfellow. There are elements of evil in her. To explain that would carry us far back. I should have to speak of powers and principalities, and all that would seem to a modern reader mostly mythological. This is not the place, nor do these questions come first. It is enough to say here that nature, like us, but in her different way, is much alienated from her Creator. Though in her, as in us, gleams of the old beauty remains. But they are there not to be worshipped, but to be enjoyed. She has nothing to teach us. It is our business to live by our own law, not by hers, to follow in private or in public life the law of love and temperance, even when they seem to be suicidal, and not the law of competition and grab, even when they seem to be necessary for our survival. For it is part of our spiritual law never to put survival first, not even the survival of our species. We must resolutely train ourselves to feel that the survival of man on this earth, much more of our own nation or culture or class, is not worth having unless it can be had by honorable and merciful means. The sacrifice is not so great as it seems. Nothing is more likely to destroy a species or a nation than a determination to survive at all costs. Those who care for something else more than civilization are the only people by whom civilization is at all likely to be preserved. Those who want heaven most have served earth best. Those who love man less than God do most for man. And so wrote C.S. Lewis in the article on living in an atomic age. And I think that has so much application to us today. It is our attitude that is at root here. Why are people panic buying? Why are people freaking out? Where I live, where there's no virus yet. It's not here yet, as far as we know. And it's certainly not a problem yet. And yet, they're panic buying all kinds of things, especially for some reason, toilet paper. And I think it's going to be great when this is all over, the number of people who are going to be embarrassed to go to their hall closet and have to deal with 1.5 years worth of toilet paper supplies in their closet where they'd rather put something else. And Amy said today, maybe more people now are going to start converting their toilets into bidets, so it'll function as both a toilet and a bidet. Could be, who knows? But see, that just comes down to it. The real contagion that we have to worry about here is not the coronavirus. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't listen to the authorities, especially the medical authorities. Look, I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on the internet. I'm not the person you should come to for medical advice or any of this stuff. You know where to go for that. Obviously, you should take precautions. How many and what kind is going to depend, like we said last week, in large amount to your calling. If you missed that episode 150, please go back and listen to it. I think it's really important, and I think it could be really helpful to you. And if you don't want to check out the show notes at discipleup.org, it's just discipleup.org/episode-150/. That'll take you right there. The real contagion that we're dealing with right now, ahead of the coronavirus, because there are plenty of places where it's really not a problem yet. It will get here for sure, but not yet, is fear. And fear is contagious. If you ever saw the TV series, now I'm just blanking on the name of Band of Brothers. Holy cow. I've read the book. I've seen the TV show many times. That's me changing the mic. There's an episode there where they're in the Ardennes forest, and this is where Easy Company of the 101st Airborne Division probably came closest to breaking in World War II. It was just an awful, awful, awful experience. And they did have guys crack under the pressure. And they use that, and they have the kind of the sergeant who's sort of holding the company together, because the company commander at this point is a new guy and doesn't know what he's doing, and he doesn't really care that much, apparently. But he makes the statement that fear is contagious. And when they see people cave into fear, they get them away. They get them off the line, away from their buddies, take them to the rear. And the main reason they do it is not to show compassion to the person that's breaking down into fear. The main reason they do it is to show compassion to everybody else, because fear is contagious. And if fear spreads through a military unit in a combat situation, it will collapse. It absolutely will. And it's happened millions, at least hundreds of thousands of times in military history. I mean, it happens a lot. And you don't want that to happen. So when someone shows fear, you don't sit down with them and gather all your buddies around and talk about it. You get them away to deal with it privately, and then hopefully, they get past that, then they'll be able to come back, because fear is contagious and you don't want people to catch it. So yeah, you isolate them, at least from the frontline troops. Now take them, behind the lines, let them rest. They found in World War II a lot of times that if guys just had 24 hours or 48 hours to just rest, get cleaned up and relax and have some hot food, a lot of times they would be ready to go past that, back into combat. But nevertheless, good combat leaders are always watching, because fear is contagious. Today, we see fear sweeping our land. We see people panic buying when they don't need to, and when they're actually harming other people who maybe do need some toilet paper, but now they can't get any because you bought 47 rolls of TV. Great. Thanks so much. So I wanted to spend the last few minutes of the podcast here. I want to go through some verses on fear. Some of these you will have heard of, but some of these maybe you haven't. And it's important to think about these things, because there is a difference between being wise and prepared and fear. So I found some verses in the Old Testament that I want you to, two in particular that I found. One, they're both from Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 3 and then Deuteronomy chapter 20. In Deuteronomy 3, verses 21 and 22, and all these will be from the ESV version, it says, "And I commanded Joshua at that time, your eyes have seen all that the Lord your God has done to these two kings. So will the Lord do to all the kingdoms into which you are crossing. You shall not fear them, for it is the Lord who fights for you." Okay, people love to quote those kind of verses, but sometimes we quote them in the wrong way. Now, God goes on and gets a little more specific in Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 1 through 4. "When you go out to war against your enemies and see horses and chariots and an army larger than your own," remember Israel at this time coming into the promised land did not have any chariots and probably didn't have any horses, certainly not very many, if they had any at all. "You shall not be afraid of them, for the Lord your God is with you, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And when you draw near to battle, the priest shall come forward and speak to the people, and shall say to them, 'Hear, O Israel, today you are drawing near for battle against your enemies. Let not your heart faint. Do not fear or panic or be in dread of them, for the Lord your God is he who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies, to give you the victory.'" Okay. So now imagine now that you're one of these soldiers of Israel, common foot soldier guy. I mean, you're not part of, they didn't actually have an army. It was just when they had to fight, all the men of that age that were healthy and able, they would line up and, they'd had some training and they had some sort of weapons and maybe some armor, maybe not, who knows. Whatever they had, they would pull together and they would go out to fight. So let's say that you're just a common Israeli soldier, foot soldier of that day, and you hear this. So when the command comes to gather to fight, you just walk out there wearing your shorts and your sandals. You don't take your helmet. You don't take any armor that you might have. You don't take a sword. You don't take a spear. You don't take a shield. You just stroll out there and say, "It's going to be fine. I'm just going to come out here and sit back and relax." Maybe you bring a chair with you, because God's going to fight my battle for me. Would you do that? Well, some Christians do. Yeah, and that's really mega foolish. Because if you read most of the battles in the Old Testament, they actually were engaged in the fighting. Now, there are some where they did not, where God just miraculously stepped in and wiped out the enemy. But most of the battles in the Old Testament that Israel fought, they actually fought in battles. And God blessed them and helped them, sometimes miraculously and sometimes in other ways that we don't even know or see, but they did get the victory. See, preparing for something is not a sign of fear. When I say don't fear, I am not saying don't prepare for the virus. Not at all. Don't misunderstand me. You should prepare. You should take a good hard look at your situation. Some of you probably need to isolate. If you're bad health, if you've got, especially if you've got breathing issues and that kind of stuff, just like, the president and all of the health organizations nationally and in your state, in your county, in your city are saying, if that's what you need to do, do it. Most of us won't be that bad or that far over to that into the spectrum, but we still need to be prepared, staying clean, washing your hands, blah, 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 all that stuff. That, again, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to preach at you about that. But that's preparation. Think of all these things that they're telling us as armor and as weapons to go into battle. So you want to be prepared for it. That's not giving into fear. Fear is when you panic and freak out when it's not necessary. And, fear is like people running around saying the civilization's over, the world is over, we're all going to die. See, if you're that person, you need to stop. I remember a few years ago when ISIS was on the rise and rampaging across the Middle East, out of Syria and into Iraq. And I had a guy that came to church at that time, and he said, well, what's going to happen? It was nobody can stop them. They're just going to keep going. And I said, no, they're not. He was clearly very, very worried about this. Looked fearful to me. That's my opinion. Don't want to cast any stones at anybody. But I said to him, eventually they're going to run into a prepared professional army. And when they do, they're going to stop. And that's exactly what happened. So that's fear, see? Fear and panic. Remember what the priest said to the people? Do not fear or panic or be in dread of them. If you're dreading this virus, that's bad. Preparing for it rationally, carefully, yeah, that's good. Making some decisions, maybe, you've decided, okay, maybe I was going to do these things, but maybe I won't do that now because of what's going on and things could happen. Maybe I was going to go, overseas, but maybe I won't go now because, they might just close down the airplanes and then I won't be able to get home. And I don't want that to happen, so I'm going to stay home. That's not giving into fear. That's being rational and making the preparations that you need to make. In 2 Kings 17, 37 through 40, it says, and the statutes and the rules and the law and the commandment that he wrote for you, you shall always be careful to do. You shall fear no other gods, and you shall not forget the covenant that I have made with you. You shall not fear other gods, but you shall fear the Lord your God, and he will deliver you out of the hand of your enemies. However, they would not listen, but they did according to their former manner. Now, the reason I picked this is the line, you shall not fear other gods. We in America and in the Western civilization as a whole have made gods out of our technology and our science. And you hear people just say, oh, science, science, science. It's interesting to me that the same people that are constantly telling me I need to listen to science when it comes to some things, don't listen to science themselves when it comes to other things such as gender. But I'm not going to fear other gods. I'm going to fear the Lord. There's a spiritual aspect to this. If we've idolized our technology, if we've idolized our comfort, if we've idolized our pleasure and our leisure, we need to repent. Because we should only fear God, nothing else. Isaiah 41:10 says, fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Now, the important thing about this verse is, obviously, God is saying this to people who are in trouble, or he wouldn't need to be holding them up and strengthening them and helping them, right? Something bad is happening here, or will happen if you want to view this as prophecy. But I mean, that's our life. We all know that bad things are going to happen. No matter how positive of a thinker you are, you know that at some point down the road, something bad's going to happen, right? You don't know when or where or what, but you know it will. And so that's when we rely on God. Instead of being afraid, either before or during it, we trust him. So we don't fear now, but we make wise preparations and we continue to serve the Lord. When the virus reaches your area, then again, you don't fear, but as we said last week, you serve God according to your callings. And if you yourself get it, you don't fear. You trust God. You do what your doctors tell you. And you pray for a recovery. Now, I've got 4 verses here from the New Testament. I'm going to go through those kind of quickly. These you've probably heard of. Mark 5:35 and 36. While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house someone who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." See, here's what we need to do when we hear these terrible things about the coronavirus, and a lot of them are just not true, and a lot of them we just don't know, and things are exaggerated and whatever. Don't fear, only believe. Hold fast to God. Be cool, be calm, and start checking your sources. If these things are true or not, and use a lot of things that they're just not true. So just relax. Trust the Lord. Romans 8:15. For you did not receive a spirit that makes you a slave again to fear. Notice that. Our natural state is to be a slave to our fears. But you received the spirit of sonship, and by him we cry, Abba, Father. Now it's interesting here that Paul is contrasting fear and slavery to fear with a close faith in God, reaching up to God, crying out to God as your father, as your daddy, as your papa. And I like that. That, by the way, is the NIV. Somehow I got an NIV out of there. I didn't think I did. Oh, well, sorry. But you know the verse. So think about that again. Your natural state is to be a slave to fear, but when you come to Christ, you're rescued from that. But now you're being tempted, many of you, to fall back into it. Don't do it. Instead of fearing, turn to God. Every time you feel like you might be overwhelmed by fear, you feel it rising up in your throat, your heart's pounding, and you're getting that tense, trapped, crazy feeling, you cry out to God. And remember, he's your papa. He's going to take care of you. What's the worst that can happen? If you're a Christian, the worst thing that can happen to you is not death. It's losing your faith in the Lord. That's the absolute worst. So, trust him. Hebrews 13:6, quoting the Old Testament, he says, so we can confidently say, and here's the quote, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? What can a virus do to you? Well, it can kill your body. Sure enough, absolutely, definitely can do that, but it can't touch your soul. So in the end, what's more important to you? See, that's one of the good things about times like this, is it forces you to really come to grips with what's the most important thing to me. It's easy to sit in church on Sunday morning when you're comfortable and confident and healthy and sing with everybody else, oh, you're the most important thing to me, God. If nobody else goes with me, I'll follow you, God. No matter what happens, but then in times like this, you find out maybe that's not so true. And I've seen a lot of people singing in the church and all that, and then something really bad happens like this or something else, and then they begin to question their faith. Well, what does that tell you? That tells you their faith was weak to start with, and they had never really made that total commitment to God. They had never really totally understood that the most important thing in my life is not my life. It's my soul and my relationship with God. And finally, the big one, the one you always hear about. Almost left it out, but I thought I'd throw it in again anyway. I know you've heard it, but it never hurts to hear it again. 1 John 4:18, There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, for fear has to do with punishment. Whoever fears has not been perfected in love. So there you go. The answer to fear is love. The answer to fear is Abba, Father. It's going to your Papa. It's loving him and letting him love you and understanding that he does love you and that no matter what happens to you in this world, because as C.S. Lewis pointed out, you are going to die. No matter what happens, he'll still love you, so trust him. That's the Christian response to the coronavirus. Calmness, peace, trust, and then reaching out in service, as we can, to all those around us. And with that, I'm going to wrap up today's podcast. I don't know if we're going to continue talking about this stuff next week. I hope not. But who knows? I'm just going to wait and see, because right now, pretty much everything in my life is on hold and in flux, waiting to see what will happen. And we're just going to trust God and let him open doors and see what's going to happen. Now, if you'd like to comment or you have any questions, maybe you disagree with some things you heard or whatever, the easiest way to get a hold of me is email me, Louie, Louie, at discipleup.org, or you can go to the Facebook page, facebook.com/discipleup, and you can leave any comments you have there. I'd love to hear from you. Plus, there's at Disciple Up, there's tons of good stuff for you. If you are having to stay home more now, there's a big, huge, long video lesson on the life of Abraham. There's other videos. There's links to all of these podcasts. If you haven't heard all 150, lucky you. You can go spend your time in isolation listening to Disciple Up. And more, so much more. So check out discipleup.org. So until next week, this is Louie saying thank you so much for listening. God bless you. Please share this on social media or wherever you can, and tell your friends about Disciple Up. Until next week, God bless you. Take care. And remember, every time is a good time to disciple up. So long.
Disciple Up, the Empowering Disciples podcast, is written, produced, directed, in as much as there's any direction to this thing at all, edited every once in a while, and paid for by Louie. It's his personal ministry, and it's not connected to Christ Church on the River. CCR does not sponsor, pay for, or necessarily approve the content found therein. The theme music for Disciple Up is Hot Wheels by Varensky. Yes, Louie actually paid for the rights to this very cool piece of music, so don't worry, and please call off the lawyers, as he's busy enough without having to deal with all that. All opinions expressed during Disciple Up are Louie's, and Louie's alone. They do not necessarily represent those of our sponsor, the Lord Jesus Christ. However, where the opinions, thoughts, impressions, and feelings shared are in line with God's Word, and faithfully represent what our Lord says in His holy word, the Bible, then they are representative of our Lord Jesus Christ. If you're wondering how the heck you're supposed to know this, remember, God tells you to test all things. Hold on to the truth. It's up to you to do the due diligence that God commands, so do it. Don't whine about it, and don't complain about how hard it is. Don't blame me for it. Disciple Up, and do what you know you're supposed to do. If you'd like to know more about Louie or Disciple Up, please go to discipleup.org and check out everything you find there. Or not, it's completely up to you. Disciple Up, the Empowering Disciples podcast will, God willing, publish an episode every week covering different areas of concern to disciples of Jesus. If that's important to you, then please subscribe on iTunes, Google, Stitcher, or another one of the many podcast aggregators available to you. If it's not, then don't. If you'd like to get in touch, please email Louie at louie@discipleup.org. God bless you.